live button on this thing?
We are live.
Oh, we're live on this too.
Awesome.
There we go.
Very good.
Okay. Pick a pencil here. Welcome everyone, I'm Brian, and we're going to be drawing a female head, portrait, however you want to call it. And hopefully, get both of these on screen here. Sorry, I've got another camera over here. I'm realizing it isn't lined up quite how I thought. We'll see. Let's see if that shows up. Okay, so I'm just going to start.
Should we show the reference first?
Oh, yeah, you can show the reference. Yeah. That's the reference. That's what I'm going to be working from. And I don't know, I'll just walk you through it step by step. I'm just going to treat it kind of like I would a demo, but then people are welcome to ask questions as always. And, you know, usually once people start asking questions, I start working a lot slower because I end up talking a lot and thinking about the questions. And so we'll see how far we get on this. I really don't know how far I'll get. But we're going to find out. Also, if you're watching on Instagram, the place we're looking for questions is on YouTube. Just so you know, I can't like watch both chats at the same time. So yeah, if you want to ask a question, head over to YouTube, find us on there. And that is where we'll be keeping an eye on things. I can get this on screen here. Hang on, I gotta adjust the Instagram thing here a little bit. Okay, that's reasonably good, I think.
You want to do your intro over again? So we can cut it from...
Not really.
Okay.
Yeah, so starting with basically just an oval, right? Because we're just doing a head drawing. And it's just a head. And an oval is a good place to start depending on the person. Like some people's cranial masses are wider and longer and some are shorter and more round. It just depends on the person. And in this case, I'm just going to start with something kind of like this. You know, so her head, I mean, it has a little bit of a tilt to it, right? She's kind of like tilted a little bit. And then we're also looking up at her just a little bit as well, right? So we're going to find kind of where the side plane of the head is. Pull it down this direction. And I'm really looking at the side of her head and just trying to kind of match that curve a little bit right around here. You know, and then we'll kind of find a nice rhythmical sweep that goes from the back of the head down through the jaw. And in this case, I think it's going to sit pretty flat along here, right? And then her chin kind of sits right along here. She doesn't have like a super tall head. It's like kind of like a rounder type shape. Probably something like that. That's what I was afraid of. The two-camera thing is complicated. There we go. Okay. So let's look for the center line, right? So next we want to work from big shapes to small shapes is the idea, right? So we're starting with just the big shape of the head. It sounds weird, but this is possibly one of the more difficult steps of the whole thing. It's just this big shape, and it takes a lot of practice, and there's definitely like a logic to it kind of that helps to, you know, to understand. But a lot of that just comes through practice. So the next is going to be the center line. kind of running down through the chin for sure, and then it's going to have a little bit of an angle because her head's tilted a little bit. So it's going to be like around here, probably somewhere around there. And then the hairline. Her hairline sits pretty low on her head. You know, like she kind of gives her like a little bit of a small forehead. So we'll pull that down a little bit here. And keep in mind, there's a tilt as well. So that applies to the hairline also, right? In fact, I'm looking at it here. I feel like I could tilt this center line even more maybe. Just a little bit. Oh, gee, that was a bad line. Try that again. A little more like that, right? And then we'll kind of find a little bit of a tilt for the hairline along there. And then we want to break the face into thirds, right? So the face basically sits between the hairline and the chin. Break that space into thirds, right? And not everybody fits exactly equal thirds. It's something that we kind of learn to train, but then we also have to know when to deviate from that, right? Because some people have like a large bottom third. That's pretty common. My head's kind of like that. Like I have like a bigger jaw, and some people have slightly small foreheads, which is kind of the case here. And so you have to account for that, right? You have to be able to look at a person and recognize kind of when and how they match those thirds. You know, and our brain's good at recognizing equal thirds. We can train to do that. And then once you can do that, then you can usually spot when things don't match that, you know, which is kind of why that's helpful. So let's go maybe a little small on the forehead. Just taking my best guess right now. Trying to figure out. A little big down here. I think we can push these down. At least this one down a little bit more. See if we can get this to match her head, you know? Because even at this stage, I mean, it seems weird. Like there's no real likeness here yet, but there kind of is, right? Like this is where it kind of starts, is getting that proper breakdown that matches the type of likeness that you're trying to get. So this seems like, you know, a simple step, but it's critical. Like it needs to be correct. We also have the back of the jaw and the ear probably sitting back here, but truthfully, I'm just guessing a little bit because we can't see that in the reference. It's covered by hair. My guess would be it's somewhere back here, right? What's up?
We have some people asking to see the reference photo. Do you want to explain how we're going to show it? And they're thinking it should be on screen the whole time, but we're just going to switch back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, we can just switch back and forth and show you the photo occasionally because we've got it loaded up, but we can't. I mean, I guess we could make it next time to be on screen the whole time, but it takes up a lot of space. And,
I'll cut to it right now.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, so basically that's the reference, right? And we've got, I don't know, probably I just chose it because it has cool hair, and hair is kind of fun to draw. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So you can see, I mean, there's a little bit of a tilt, right? We're kind of looking up at her just a little bit, maybe, not like a ton, but a little bit. And yeah, just trying to identify that big shape of the head, you know, and her head specifically, trying to figure out how that works. And yeah, that's basically where we're at. You know, her ear would sit like back here, but again, we can't see the ear.
I need to see past your hair.
Oh no.
Need to pin a comment.
Oh, okay. What's it say?
I'll tell you later.
So this is kind of the basic breakdown. And, you know, and then we just kind of keep going, right? Like I said, we work from big shapes to small shapes. You can already see this line here is kind of like if we were treating the head like a box, where would the corner be? is kind of what I'm looking for here, you know. And so you can even see like the separation in planes a little bit would exist, kind of something like this, which you see in like Loomis, but Loomis does it a little bit differently. He isn't looking for the corner, he's more looking for like with the flat part of the side of the head. And so, I don't know, just something that's a little bit different. And then from there we can get into eye sockets, right? So we're working from big shapes down to small shapes, so the next thing down is probably going to be eye sockets. Kind of sitting in here. And get this right. Right, the other one's over here. Right, kind of shortcut the inside of that eye socket a little bit. And then her brow works in a way where it's relatively flat for a little bit, and then it becomes very round. Around this way. Right, so we get the brow then kind of wrapping around the corner, right? Because remember, the head's not really a box. So this corner is actually a rounded section of the brow right here. Kind of cutting over this way, and then it kind of cuts down and in this direction. Now her head kind of works in a way where her eyes sit like kind of high in the sockets. I think that comes from her eye sockets and like the entire middle third being a little more narrow. So there's not a lot of like space between her eyebrows and the top of her eyelids, you know, and then on some people there's like a lot of space there, you know, and so it's learning to recognize all these little things about people, how the head works, different ways it can work. This eye kind of wrapping around this way, connecting right into the forehead back this way. You know, so that's basically where that eye socket goes. We could actually find the other eye socket, I guess. Might be good. Come out this direction. Sitting back in there. Right, but then we get the nose, right? We need the sweep of the nose. So I'm just going to start with something really simple and just judge a nice angle for the nose. Let's say about there. Which doesn't totally work, right? So one of the things I'm looking for, well, maybe it does, right? If her eyes were in here, right? When I look at the reference, you can see that the ball of her nose, right, to the top of the alar cartilage where it wraps back around, kind of hits the bottom of the eyelid. You know, so the bottom of the eyelid would probably be down here somewhere, which means the ball of the nose needs to start really high up here, which tells me that this middle third is maybe a little bit long, or maybe I need to draw the eye sockets a little bit bigger. Probably the case. A lot of different types of noses. You can see that on her, you can show the reference again, possibly. You know, if you look at that, you can kind of see that the connection point, or like the bottom of the wing of the nostril down here, sits a little bit lower than the connection point of the cartilage, right, of the alar cartilage coming back into the septum right here. And so there's like a little bit also showing here. So yeah, just something to think about, right? In case you're wondering why I kind of rounded this part right here, right, where that's coming from is the roundness of the tooth cylinder, you know, because that tooth part of the skull underneath there is very round. It's like a little cylindrical shape sitting right in here, and the nose can wrap around that shape. Now, on some people, it does that a lot. Other people, not so much. Just depends on the person. You know, just kind of working our way up. Next, we're going to take this bottom third and break that into thirds, right? And that's going to give us placement of the mouth and the chin, right? Kind of measure this stuff a little bit. Seems pretty good. It's tough to know exactly, right? Like, do we measure from this third line I put down, or do we measure from the septum up here? I'm going to go with that septum measurement just because it looks right, but there's no particular reason why. I would just pick the one that works best. Remember the tooth cylinder I was talking about? It's rounded this way, also rounds this way, right? And that's kind of what pushes the lips outward a bit, you know, and causes them to sit on like a slightly different center line than the rest of the head. You know, same thing with the chin. Chin pops out, kind of wraps around this way. Not quite that much in her case. A bit more subtle. That's decent. I think that's off to a decent start. You know, we can come in, and there's a number of things we can do at this point. We can start working on the features more. We can build up the side plane of the head a little bit more and kind of work out that cheekbone and how it interacts with the chin. At this point, you know, as long as everything is more or less in the right spot, the exact order of operations from this point isn't super important. You know, so her hairline connects up around here. And let's see here. Okay, let's find a little bit of the outer part, the cheek here. So I'm going to keep very simple because you don't want to exaggerate anything on this outer contour, right? If anything, you want to simplify it, not exaggerate it. Kind of cuts in a little bit. Okay, so now the chin, if I draw a plumb line straight up from the edge of the chin, it's about the tip of the nose, right? So if we use that plumb line, that tells me the chin then kind of comes from this direction, right? And then at this point, what's happening is since we're looking up at her kind of a little bit, then we're seeing actually a little bit of the underplane of the jaw down here, just ever so slightly, not that much. It's probably good. You know, and then we can start to connect the neck a little bit here. Gosh, I feel like we need a little bit more chin. Seems good. Okay, so let's find some of the neck, right? Before we go too much farther, make sure the neck fits on there, and we get at least a little bit of a neck indication, because we need a way to end the drawing. She has a very long neck. Right, drops like way down here. shoulder is just below chin level. Kind of sitting back here. No, sitting forward more. Right, and then this is all going to be hair, so we could find the back of the neck. Right, in theory, we should be able to find something that fits with this and looks correct, but that's all going to be covered in hair anyway. Okay, so I think that's looking decent. Let's see here. As a reminder for those of you on Instagram, we aren't really able to watch the Instagram comments. But we're on YouTube also right now, simultaneously. So if you guys want to ask questions, YouTube is the place to do it, because that's the one that we're kind of keeping an eye on. I'll start looking for questions in a minute. Right, just kind of refining things a little bit. Okay, so her eyes then are going to sit this direction. Other eye starts back up in there. We can get the hairline on here as well. That might be good. Probably not too soon for that. Right? Remember, it sits up here. It sits at an angle. You know, has the same tilt as everything else. And then we start seeing kind of cut down this way a little bit. And then suddenly her hair kind of overlaps this area. Probably better.
Here's a question for you, Brian.
Okay.
This is from Vincent, who just joined.
Vincent, welcome.
He says that he is curious why whenever drawing a female face, it ends up looking like a male face instead of female.
It's a good question. I mean, it's hard to say exactly without seeing the drawing. But typically, it's just understanding, you know, basically the differences between male and female heads, which is usually a slightly rounder jaw. You know, like it's on men that you usually would see more of like a bigger jaw back here. You know, you get that kind of like masculine jaw shape. But then what's interesting is a lot of women, and even like models and stuff, have like a more masculine jaw type. So it's hard to say exactly, you know, like certainly it's the rounder, softer features, but it's not just that. There's something else to it that honestly, I don't even know if I know what it is. I never really thought about it much before. Aside from that, let's get some lips on here. But if I could see your drawing, I could tell you pretty quickly what was going on with it. But I can think of a lot of reasons why. You know, square, big jaw would be part of it. Getting the proportions, you know, exact. Getting, I don't know, various things like that. For the shape of the lips now, right? Trying to get that exactly where they need to be. Right, so they're going to cut down this direction and kind of out to the node, out here a little bit. Now, lips are always tough. You got to get them designed so that they fit the space they need to be in, like, perfectly. Zoom in on this thing a little bit more. There we go. And then practicing lips over and over until you start to figure out, like, kind of how they work a little bit. Which sounds weird, but they have very specific looks from different angles, you know, and very specific overlaps and things that they have to get just right. You know, lip type is one of them for, is it Victor? I was asking about the male versus female heads.
Vincent.
Vincent.
Yeah.
Oh, off. I apologize. But lip shape is a big part of it, right? Like, women's lips tend to be more full, men's lips tend to be thinner and non-existent. But again, that's just like a generic guide. You know, it's not like it's set in stone by any means. I mean, there is so much variation out there. You know, I think there's room for everything. A lot of it just comes down to design and being really accurate with your likeness and kind of capturing a person's type. There's almost like a big design element to it. So I was kind of marking where that shadow will go just to judge this space properly. Nostril, let's see, let's get the nose kind of locked down and then we'll put the eyes in, right? So we can kind of see where the opening of for the nasal cavity is. It's going to kind of pop up this way a little bit.
That's another question.
Yeah.
This is from Brickman again.
Brickman.
Back. He says, have you tried the Russian academic method of drawing heads? Planes and nails are used to indicate where the intersection of the planes. Sorry, I read that weird. Used to indicate the intersection of the planes. Have you tried it, and what do you think?
I don't know if I've really tried it, but I have some of the Russian books, and they're really interesting. I mean, their drawings are awesome, but it was kind of like a little bit different from the way that I learned. But there's nothing wrong with that at all. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to draw. It's not like the way I do it is the only way. Hopefully, I'm not making it seem that way. And those Russian people, the Russian, is it the Repin? I don't know. There's a couple like big Russian schools, and their work is really good. You know, incredibly good actually. I mean, it's good enough that over at Watts we were studying that stuff all the time. What was interesting is we didn't really use their techniques, but we did studies of their finished drawings. You know, and so we might construct them a little bit differently, but at the end, that kind of just shows that both work. You know, it's not like one works and one doesn't. But yeah, they were really good. So my opinion would be, from what I've seen, the way they work is geared more towards like fine art, where you're working more from models and doing less invention type stuff. So a little bit in terms of like their process, whether or not that's going to work for you depends on what you plan on doing with those skills in the future, right? And if you plan on going into like comic books or illustration where you're going to be doing a lot of like figure invention, and then maybe you know, because I think they work more like site size type method. What was his description on how they worked? How did you describe it?
He said, planes and nails are used to indicate the intersection of the planes.
Yeah, planes are critical. I mean, I can't think exactly off the top of my head how they were delineating them, but they certainly understood planes well. But I could be wrong. I don't know. Like, I don't know exactly which, you know, Russian art you're talking about. All I know is at Watts there was like, I guess it was like Russian fine art maybe. It was a lot of like charcoal drawings and figure drawings and stuff. And that's kind of the stuff that I'm familiar with. I'm trying to capture a hair shape here, just real quick, just to get a feel for the whole thing before I start really getting into details. I feel like it could be very easy. Sorry.
There's a couple more questions for you when you're ready for.
Yeah.
The first one is from Diego Olivares.
Yeah.
I think he's a student of ours.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
His name.
Yeah.
He asks, where did you get the sculpture that's on the shelf behind you? I think
Oh,
the muscle guy.
yeah, if you're asking about this guy back here, that came from anatomytools.com, I believe. I think the name of the company is just like Anatomy Tools. Might actually just be anatomytools.com. You can go there and check it out. The only issue with those, and I bought mine, that thing's probably 20 years old now, and they were a lot cheaper back then. And nowadays, they are not cheap. They're extremely expensive models. And part of the reason, you can't see them, but I have a different set over here from 3D Total. And part of the reason I bought those was because I wanted to get a good look at them. Because people ask me all the time, like, where can we get good models like that, like anatomy type models? And you know, most people aren't looking to spend $500 on one model, which at Anatomy Tools you could easily. And yeah, so I was looking for a better alternative, or at least a cheaper alternative. I wouldn't say they're better, but they're pretty good, the 3D Total ones. There's a few things over the years looking at them that are a little bit iffy. There's like 2 anatomical things about them that bother me a little bit. I don't know for sure that they're wrong because there's so much like variation out there from person to person that it's hard to say like, oh, this is wrong. Plus, maybe I'm just not understanding what they sculpted properly. But those are kind of my 2 recommendations, at least the stuff I have, right, is either pay a ton of money over at Anatomy Tools, and you get what you pay for. I mean, they're super nice models, you know. Like, I'm not saying it's not worth the money, but like, if I don't think I could buy that now, you know. 20 years ago when I had extra money and I'd go to their booth at Comic-Con and they only cost like $250 or something, you know, I went nuts. But nowadays, I don't know. They're good models though.
There's one more question for you here.
Yeah.
This is from Caitlin.
Okay.
She says, I took classes with you guys months ago and then I kind of fell off a bit. Any words of motivation and wisdom for someone trying to get back into consistent practice again?
Yeah, that's a good question. I went through the same thing many times. So yeah, in terms of like motivation and getting back into things, I mean, there's no easy way to do it. The truth is, if you spend a lot of time not drawing, you kind of lose that dexterity. You know, you'll retain a lot of like the knowledge aspects of drawing if you don't draw for a while, but the dexterity and the muscle memory, it wanes over time. You know, like muscles, if you don't use them, they don't last. And so it can be really frustrating because you start trying to draw again and you're like, oh my God, I regressed and went backwards a lot, you know, and that's probably true. That's probably the case. I mean, when I was first starting out, I stopped at one point for like 10 years maybe. It was a long time. I went to Watts for a little while when I was like in my early 20s, and then just for like a couple years maybe, and then I don't know, life happened, and I ended up stopping that and then just going and doing other stuff, working other jobs, just doing a bunch of stuff. And it wasn't until about 10 years later that I came back and got serious about it. And yeah, it was like starting over, you know. But at the same time, it wasn't, I don't know, like if you enjoy drawing and problem solving and that kind of stuff, then it's not that bad, you know. And the key is to just make sure you're in a place where you can work consistently and practice consistently, and just keep doing it. Because as soon as you stop, you kind of lose it a little bit. Okay, so we're going to try and place these eyes. I guess my point was, it's okay if you stop for a while. I did the same thing. And yeah, it's a lot of work to get going again, but it's totally possible. I mean, the fact that I'm here doing this kind of shows that, I think. Figure out where the eyebrows sit here. Kind of like right up in there. Okay, so we got to place these eyes, right? Eyes are tricky. You can see what I've worked up to here. You know, like I've created like my eye sockets, first the big shapes, and then I went in and found kind of more like the opening of the eye socket. You know, so like if you look at the skull, you know, remember when we put this brow line in, the so-called brow line, you know, in our construction, and we're breaking the head into thirds, that line isn't the opening of the eye socket. It's where the brow bone protrudes out the farthest, right? So like, oh geez, sorry, Instagram, I just bumped your camera. Let's go for where my skull went. It disappeared. But if you look at a skull, you'll see, you know, especially like from the side or something, back there. I can't reach it. That this point it protrudes out the farthest, right? So the center line would kind of like come out a little bit across the brow and then cut back in. You know, if we could see like a center line there. And then, yeah, so what we need to find is the opening of the eye socket. And that sits just under that point, right? Just below it. Depending on the person, there might be more or less space between these two. You know, you have to learn to judge person to person, kind of figure out what's going on. And, yeah. Then we just kind of drop the eyes in there. So you can see everything I've done up to this point is basically getting it ready to put the eyes in. And if we do all of this just right and get everything aligned properly, the eyes should just kind of fall into place, you know, because drawing eyes is hard, and then drawing two eyes that match is even harder, right? Like it's one of the hardest parts of this whole thing. But you can see, if we take the time to get it set up, they should just kind of fall in here, right? So her tear duct is here, and then her eye, right, kind of comes up. Eyes typically have, not all the time, but a lot of the time, have like 3 planes to them, right? So it comes up, over, and then down, right? It's going to sit like right in there. Now she doesn't have like really big eyes, but we got to make sure they're not too small either. Right, kind of sitting in there just like that. Now, before I draw too much more, I'm going to draw this one, right? Because one of the things we want to do is keep our lines really simple until we're absolutely certain that what's there is what needs to be there. Right, so this other one is wrapping around the ball of the eye this way, right? So it's going to create like this type of shape here. It's going to like come up into this corner and kind of back around here. And that feels big a little bit, right? I think part of that is coming from the fact that we need a little bit more bone on the inside of this eye socket. Try it again here.
There are a few more comments to read too.
Okay.
So this one's from a few minutes back. This is from Brickman again.
Yeah.
He says Repin's Academy method, they say don't copy the model, they analyze it and build with anatomy of construction, perspective, and anatomy.
Hey, if that's Repin's model, then I inadvertently copied them because that sounds good to me. That's exactly what I'm going for. It's not really copying, it's about learning to construct 3-dimensional forms. Yeah, so that's cool. I'm glad you mentioned that because it's good to know. People ask me questions about that stuff all the time.
Vincent has another question also.
Vincent again?
Yep. Vincent asks, any advice for an artist in high school who wants to be a professional artist one day?
Wow, any advice for an artist in high school that wants to be a professional? I would say, I mean, draw as much as you can. I would say while you're in high school, just focus on enjoying drawing and don't worry too much about like super hardcore training, you know, and then once you finish high school, you know, you gotta, if you really, really want to do that, you know, you're gonna have to train a lot and spend a lot of time drawing and, you know, figuring out how all this stuff works. And, yeah, I mean, you basically have to choose. Like, do you want to put together like a home study program and work from home, maybe online schools? Do you want to travel somewhere and go study somewhere with a specific artist or a specific school? You know, like there's a lot of options out there. You know, self-taught is fine as long as you know what to study and put that effort in. It can work really well. And but I would say until you get done with high school, probably don't need to worry about it too much. Unless you want to go to an actual college, then I guess you do need to worry about it because they're going to want to see your portfolio and all that kind of stuff. Like it just depends partly on what you want to do in the future. But at the same time, if you're in high school, like it's not like you're actually going to know because it's probably going to change at some point. And yeah, it's hard to say. Mostly in high school, I would say just draw for fun. Take the art classes, but don't feel like you have to like be the best right away. I don't know. It's kind of a tough question, to be honest. Like when I was in high school, I always took all the art classes and I liked them. They were, some of my favorite classes for sure. But I wasn't like trying to be a professional artist at that point. That wasn't something I came up with until later. I don't know. That probably wasn't the best answer, but
Why don't you talk about
what
the
I got.
different areas of the industry that you could consider? Because you kind of have to like decide what, like what trade you want to go into. There's lots of different
A little bit,
ones.
yeah. I mean, you have to kind of decide, like, if you really want to do it for a living, I mean, you kind of have to decide what it is you want to do. It's one thing to be like, oh, I like to draw, but you have to, at some point, kind of like decide to direct that energy in a specific way, right? Because the whole industry is like portfolio based. Like, they don't really care if you have a degree. They care if you can draw and produce. That's it. That's like your degree, basically. And so, yeah, you kind of have to decide, like, do you want to go into fine art? Do you just want to draw, figure drawings and landscapes and that kind of stuff? If that's what you like doing, then you can go more into like fine art. But if you want to go more into illustration and more into concepting, I mean, there's illustration, there's concepting, there's comic books, there's book covers. I mean, there's so many different options out there. Magic cards is like a whole industry for artists now. Storyboarding, yeah. Storyboarding. I mean, there's so many options. So at some point, you have to train in the fundamentals, right? So you figure like, okay, all of these things, all those options take a basic skill set of being able to draw a thing, right? Like you got to be able to draw. If you go into concepting, it might have some people, but it will likely be more like environments and things like chairs. I don't know. Like I've heard conceptors that have taken my classes before that are like, it's not what they thought it would be, in the sense that, most people that work in concepting are designing things like lamp posts, and getting like an environment to look correctly. Like, do all the spoons look correct for an environment? Like there's kind of like all these little jobs. And then there's like the people at the top that get to do the really cool stuff that you see in all the books and things like that, So like if you go that route, you're gonna have to work your way up and get really good at drawing objects and people and things like that. And same with illustration. Illustration, you have to be able to draw literally everything, right? You never know what kind of job you're gonna get. I mean, it could literally be just about anything that you have to draw, especially like in comic books. I mean, man, who knows? Like you be drawing like I don't know, really complex environment one day, and then the next you're just all drawing a bunch of talking heads, and then the next you're drawing someone like on an operating table. And you're like, oh my god, I have to draw a bunch of like medical equipment. Like that's weird. So there's basically just like a basic skill set that's needed for all those jobs. And that's essentially kind of what I teach, right? Is like fundamentals. So teaching like just head drawing, figure drawing, basic perspective, things like that. Once you start to get the fundamentals down, then you kind of say like, okay, I need to like pick something to gear a portfolio to, and you have to start working on portfolio pieces. And at first they're going to be terrible, probably. Maybe they'll be good. I don't know. But usually they're kind of bad at first. And yeah, then you kind of start working your way towards like a better portfolio type situation, which is going to require getting portfolio reviews, getting feedback from, whatever companies you want to work for, and getting, figuring out what's needed, right? What are your weak points? What are your strong points. What are you good at, bad at? You know, you can get a lot of feedback that'll tell you those things, and then you'll kind of know what to go work on. And yeah, that's kind of the process. You know, so it can help to go to certain schools, but I just know I was an art major out of college for a little while, and I would not recommend that one. That's all I can say. I won't say what it was, but a lot of those programs aren't great. They don't teach you super useful things. They teach you stuff you don't really need. And yeah, but Watts was awesome, right? Because then eventually I was like, man, those classes I took at Watts, fortunately I took those first, and then later went and worked a bunch of random jobs, and then kind of went back to school for a little while. And I was like, oh, well, I like drawing, I'll be an art major. Why not? And then, yeah, it turned out to be something I wasn't interested in, at least at the college level. And then at that point, I knew what Watts was like, and I was like, oh, that's the type of stuff I want to do. And so I went back. Much, much more serious about it the second time. Trying to get that little bit of shadow on her nose.
Another question for you.
Okay.
This is from Jay Hernandez.
Okay.
They say, Brian, can you describe some eye anatomy as you draw them in?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I just taught, or I'm teaching a facial feature class too, where we go all through the eye and different things. I might even be able to show that real quick. But yeah, I mean, essentially at this point, what I'm really looking for is how the lids wrap around the ball of the eye. You know, are we looking up into them? Are we seeing some of the bottom plane of the lid in here? A little bit of tear duct, kind of a little bit of bottom plane, probably a little bit over here as well. And that's it. I mean, that's all I've drawn in so far. Nothing too complicated, but again, I think, let's see if I can find it real quick here. Back to the beginning. Oh, I flipped right to it. Nice. Let's see this. You know, because I just taught the eye class, eye demo. So this was the demo. There was a combination of this, and then this was the demo. You know, but all the parts, you know, we went through it piece by piece, right? We've got all the important parts, right? If you want to get really technical, I mean, there's way more. But you got your tear duct, right? Sitting here, the sclera is the white of the eye. It's called the sclera. You get the iris, right, which is basically the color part of the eye. And then the pupil, which is a little hole in the middle. You know, and then we just kind of talked about the actual forms, right? And how we get the lids wrapping around the ball of the eye. There's a lot of depth, right? There's like a little shelf where you get like a bottom plane of the lid, top plane of the bottom lid. All that shows up, you know, and then kind of talked about what happens to the iris and pupil when you look at it from different directions, you know, and you move it around. How's the cornea affect things, you know, and kind of a cartoon version of it a little bit. You know, then I went through and talked about how do we get eyes to work together? What happens if we look up at an eye, down at an eye? You know, how do we place eyes into eye sockets? How do we render one out? This class is like an overview type class, right? So we did 1 week on eyes, 1 week on noses, 1 week on mouths, 1 week on ears, and then the last week is going to be just a head drawing. You can use some of that information, hopefully. But yeah, hopefully that is kind of what you were talking about. And I'll keep talking about it. As I draw more in here, I can talk about it more.
There's a comment from Luis that I want to read you.
Okay.
He says, fun fact, I'm almost finished drawing the 60 eye references. It's been way too funny and interesting. I'm not sure. Is that from a class of ours? 60 eye references? Or is that from something else?
60 eye references.
Is that from one of your future classes?
I don't think I had 60 of them. Maybe I did.
Huh.
Because I mean, I had those handouts that had just a whole bunch of eyes like cut out and like pasted onto one page. And then I gave them like multiple pages of that stuff. So there could have been 60 of them.
Could have been.
Yeah, if that's what he's talking about, then that's awesome. I mean, yeah, drawing each of those would be cool.
Mm-hmm.
It would certainly be helpful.
Oh, he says yes.
Yeah, okay, good.
That's awesome. He says yes, indeed.
Cool.
There's a comment here from Jay Hernandez also that says, "Super, you just sold another series of lessons."
Nice. That's cool.
That's cool.
I appreciate that.
The features classes are super helpful.
I like the features class. I basically run them the way that I wish, there was a class like that when I was a student. And they had a features class at Watts, but it was called like features and facial expressions. So like half the class, like the features part was a little quicker, and then you get into facial expressions for like the second part. I wanted to focus just on facial features and spend like an entire demo each week on just one feature. I don't know, it would have helped me. So that's how I teach it. So we've got basic construction down here. I don't know, not super happy about this eye, but good enough, I think. Should probably be looking up into it even a little bit more. And this part comes up and then sort of cuts down a little bit more, which is interesting. Oh, no, that was too much. So at this point, now we're going more for shadow pattern, right? So we've got our features in there. I guess we can put irises in here real quick. Right, they're sitting like in here. Pretty big, take up most of that space. That doesn't look great. Let's try this one again. This one actually needs to be a little bit bigger. I think my first attempt at it was probably more correct. It happens to me surprisingly often, where I draw something and I'm like, man, this doesn't seem right. And then I change it, and then I end up changing it back to what I had initially. I don't know. I don't know if that happens to other people or if it's just me, but it's more than I would like to admit. Right, making a little more room for that eye in there. Not like a ton, but enough that I think it's going to make a difference. Now we actually have room for that little bit of the white of the eye right there.
There's another question from Louise.
Okay.
He asks, when are you going to teach facial expressions?
That's a good question. That's been on my list for a while, and honestly, the reason I haven't done it yet is because we got to get a model to shoot facial expression reference, and a lot of them, well, mostly we just haven't had time or money to do it yet. Is really what it comes down to. Because that was something that I intended to do, and it hasn't happened yet, as you seem to have noticed. But that's the reason. That's really what it comes down to, is if we can get the time and money to do more photo shoots, then I will definitely have that on the list of things to do, to shoot. Is that a little bit more?
There's a comment here from Brickman.
Yeah.
He says, Brian, I've heard horror stories about art colleges.
Oh,
I have a degree in fine arts.
Yeah.
I was lucky that my university did teach classical techniques in depth, but it seems I dodged the bullet with that one.
Yeah, I would agree. Certainly, like university and college programs, the only good ones I've ever heard of are like maybe like the, what is it, Pasadena School of Art and Design or something. And there's a couple other that have really good programs. The problem is then they're super expensive. You got to pay like a ton of money to go, and then their programs, I would say, are geared, like I wouldn't go there if you wanted to be like a fine artist. I would go more if you wanted to get into like product design or concepting or that kind of thing. I mean, they're pretty good with that stuff. but those are one of the only like actual university type colleges I know of that are doing that in a way that makes sense. Her eyes are in shadow, so you can't really see the pupils much, but I'm just going to throw that in there just because it looks strange without them. Eventually this will get covered up. Throw those in there a little bit. And part of what this one needs is a little more eyelid up here. I feel more like this one. Oh, a little bit too much. Yeah, that makes them feel like they go together a little bit more. You know, then it kind of captures that small distance up in here that she has going on, which might be a little bit small, but it's not bad. What's up?
Rickman says that he's from Mexico and here it is free. That's really cool.
That is cool. That's super cool.
Wish we were like that here.
Yeah, our colleges are very expensive. Very expensive, and then a lot of the time you don't get a very good education. At least with art. I mean, I think there's plenty of good schools out there for other stuff. But art's a tough one, and it's especially tough because you don't really like need a degree to get a cool art job. You just need the skills. And then what's misleading is that then those places that give you the degrees don't really give you the skills you need necessarily. I mean, I've met a number of illustrators that were art students. All of them say the same thing, which is I got out of art school that immediately realized, oh my God, I got to actually learn how to do this for real now. And then they spend years learning how to be an illustrator on their own, basically, and going to workshops and stuff. A little bit of shadow right down there. So I'm kind of getting into mapping shadows a little bit here, right? Starting with the nose, because nose is complicated, and it's one of the things I start with just to make sure it's going to work, because I don't know. I guess when I was a student, I struggled a lot with noses. Over the years, it's stuck with me. So we've got shadows in the eyes, right? Basically, shadow coming out this direction. Right? Remember, when we're shadow mapping, what we're doing is choosing our edges very, very carefully, right? And figuring out where do we want a soft edge, where do we want a hard edge. If you get more advanced, like, you don't have to do shadow mapping, right? It's more of a training technique, I guess. If you're wondering, yeah, it's totally possible. We could fill all this in and create the shapes and the edges all at the same time. There's nothing wrong with that. Right, get some shadow sticking out this way. Kind of cuts back up into here a little bit. I don't like that shape. I'm just going to make this connect right across that way. Right, now this eye is basically in shadow. So we could, I mean, there's not a lot of mapping to do in the eye, because we're just going to fill it in, and then later we'll add darker shapes into it. But the shadow then kind of wraps around her eyelid, right? So we get this little bit of eyelid in the light right up around here. There's a little bit of light on the brow, kind of right in here. Right, keep this all nice and soft. Right, so when we fill this in, we're just going to have a little bit of light here and a little bit of light there. That's pretty much it, right? We get shadow like on her lower lid here. Kind of wrapping around this way. Right, so that'll get filled in. We need the top of this shape as well, which basically just aligns with the eyebrow right there. Kind of pops back out on this side. Right, and then we get the end of that shape right down here. That we get like a little hard edge for that little cast shadow, and it sort of pops back up this direction. You know, over here, more or less the same thing, but we're just seeing it from a more awkward angle. Our shadow's going to come up here, cut across this direction, come back a little bit. A little bit of light on the eyelid again. This time from a cast shadow, so we'll kind of put that on there. A shadow kind of back in here, and then again that whole eye is in shadow, so I'm not going to worry about that much. Pick up a little bit of shadow down here. It's not bad. Not bad. That's a decent guide, you know, to get us started and figure out exactly what's going on here. I might make this edge a little bit harder, just to kind of contrast with this stuff up here a little bit more. You know, the lips sit in shadow basically because they're wrapping down around that direction, and complete this shape right here. Right, so that's basically going to be a shadow shape, and then we pick up a shadow underneath the lip here. Just kind of doing this and this a little bit.
There are a couple questions for you.
Okay.
I'm going to give you two of them.
Oh, two, okay.
So the first one is from Brickman, and he's asking, shadow mapping is to separate the areas of light and shadow, taking into account the types of edges?
Yes. Brickman, you are correct. Yeah. Oh, yeah, sorry.
I just wanted to build on that because they're both related to the same thing.
Yeah.
And Luis asks, Brian, I've always wondered how dark should edges be when filling the shadow shapes with tonal value? I mean, in a scale of 1 to 6, what value should the edges be?
Well, if we had that 1 to 6 scale, right, and that's what you see me do in the demos a lot, right, is I'll do this. Keep in mind, there's an infinite amount of value. The fact that I break it into 6 is purely out of convenience because it's easy to draw, basically, for a demo. You know, so I could just break this in half, break this one into thirds, break this one into thirds. That's pretty good. Typically, though, as a student, what I kind of learned is when you're starting your drawing, you would really want like 2 values in the shadow and 3 in the light, which would be more like 5. But at some point, you got to add more anyway. Like it's more just like you start your drawing that way, and then once you use up your 5 values and everything reads really well at 5 values, then you can strategically add a few more in here and there as needed. But yeah, so assuming our scale is where these 3 values, right, this is what you see me do in the demo, right? These are going to be in the light, these are going to be in shadow, you know, and then this is going to be like the darkest dark, this is the lightest light, get our value scale. That one right there, the lightest shadow value, is basically what you want your mapping to be, which is tough. It's tough because right now, this is the only thing on the page, right? All we have is mapping. We don't have other values. All we have is the white of the paper, and instead of having like a whole bunch of other values down to judge things against. So it takes a little bit of getting used to. But keep in mind, you would probably want to err on the side of your shadow mapping being too light, right? It's not like you have to hit it perfectly, because when you go back in to fill it in, it's pretty easy to darken and just kind of readjust those edges a little bit. You know, like one of the secrets to shadow mapping is to at least realize that when you create a shape, right, and you say, here's our shape, say we have a nice soft edge here, maybe firmer edge here, a little firmer here, maybe hard edge kind of over on this side that merges, right? We create a shape. When we fill this in, like right now, this whole thing feels really soft, right? But when we fill it in, what happens is we lose a lot of that softness. You know, so suddenly we're missing half of the softness, right? Because my line was soft on both sides, and then we just basically eliminated it. So it's really only the softness out this direction that really affects everything. And so edges will look a lot softer than they really are, because you know, the soft ones you want to make soft on both sides. The reason you want to make it soft on both sides is so it's easy to blend back into when you're filling things in, right? Notice I can get that to like kind of blend with the mark that I made up here pretty well, because I softened it into this area as well. And then I'm making like a circular motion with my hand when I fill it in, and it creates like softer type marks. You know, notice we don't have like a bunch of hard edges all around here, versus doing this to fill something in. You end up with hard edges all the way around. You know, but if we do more like a circular type motion and build it up a little bit more slowly, you can see we end up with softer edges all the way around, and then we can use that to kind of blend it in to our edges as we fill in those areas. And yeah, but the actual value, what really matters is the value that you fill it all in with, right? And that becomes your lightest shadow value, which is going to be this value, you know. And I don't want to take the time to draw this whole thing right now because it takes a little while to fill those in and get them all adjusted. But I have a lot of demos where I do that. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think that answers your question. It's partly just planning ahead a little bit and knowing that, you know, it's going to get filled in a specific value. And the thing you don't want is for the edges to be too dark, because then what ends up happening is you end up with core shadows everywhere, right? And it ends up looking like you have core shadows on every shadow. You don't want that. Core shadows want to be used very strategically. So when you fill in a shadow, it should look more like this, right? Without like a dark edge around it. You know, and then we can go in and add our core shadows strategically and where we want them, and say like, you know what, we actually do want a core shadow right here. And then we can come in and darken that part as needed and turn it into more of a core type shadow. You know, then the core shadows, make sure they get softened on both sides. You know, and that starts turning into your core shadow type value. And yeah, anyway, that's kind of my thinking. Let's see, what else do we need on here? We probably need a shadow on the cheek, right? Coming down this way, kind of then connecting into the chin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start here a little bit, and then I'm going to start up here, and I'm going to try and bring them together if I can. Keeping these edges nice and soft, but still a lot of variation, right? Like that's soft, but it's not as soft as that, or that, but it's still soft. This, remember, there's a rhythm we can run right through here. You know, it's like a Riley rhythm. And that is basically right where that shadow falls. Now, if you look at the shadow, can you put the reference on again? Yeah, if you look at the shadow on her cheek, you can see that there's a lot of stuff going on there, right? And there's areas that are like lighter within that shape and darker within that shape. And I would recommend just kind of ignoring most of that and just going for the big shape first. And then if you put more information into it, be really, really, really careful with it. Because when you start adding in like kind of like the different things in that cheek shadow shape, it'll age her really fast. You know, and it's easy, as soon as you over render, it basically like ages people when you start putting in too much information. So just be really careful. You can switch it back.
Luis had one more question that's kind of building on what you're talking about.
Yeah.
He says, so basically edges should be, let's say, a 5, and when filling the shadow shapes, then a 4 would be fine. Hopefully that makes sense what I mean. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, so if we're dealing with this scale, I would say I would keep it all at this point, right? So when your edges need to be your lightest shadow value when you're mapping, right? And then when it gets filled in, it all gets brought up to that same value with no core shadows, hopefully. It just makes solid shapes. Then when you go to add a core shadow, right, you hit a point where you're like, okay, we actually need a core shadow right along the nose here, right, or somewhere along here. And you go to add that in, that's going to be probably this value, right? And then most of your drawing, with the exception of the hair, probably won't have your darkest dark, right? And that's partly why, like, you're probably wondering, like, wait, if you're supposed to do this with 5 values, how do you do it with only 2 shadow values? And the truth is, you need a third one, but it's used very, very, very sparingly, right? The only place you're going to get that darkest dark in the face is probably like right in the eye, maybe the corner of the mouth a little bit, but even then I wouldn't recommend it. I would mostly keep it in the eye, because anywhere you put that darkest dark is going to start to create like a focal point a little bit on the face. And we want to keep that up in the eyes. You know, so that would be my recommendation. I would say this one is where you fill it in, or where you do your mapping and fill it in and try to get your 2 value drawing working all at that value with no core shadows, just solid shapes. And then go back in and figure out where reflected light needs to be, because reflected light is what creates your core shadows essentially. And so where we would pick that up in this case would be up under the nose, because there's a lot of light bouncing off her face up under the nose, maybe a little bit in the brow, again another area that's like a shelf kind of, right? And so it picks up light bouncing up into it. That's pretty much it. Oh, maybe the chin, just ever so slightly, a little bit of a core shadow right there, just a little bit might be good, just to help show that there's you know, a little bit of light bouncing back up into there. You can maybe push a core shadow on the cheek just a little bit, but that would have to be really subtle and careful. And again, I wouldn't start with it, right? Watch, what I'm going to do is put in our shape first here. Right? Keep it nice and soft, because it's a very rounded form. Right? And then it's going to kind of cut down this direction. Also still very soft. And then it kind of connects down into this chin shape down here. Where it starts to get a little more firm. It's interesting that her head has a tilt for sure, yet the shadow on her chin is so level when you look at the photo. I feel like if I drew it that way, it wouldn't look quite right. So I've kind of angled the shadow on the chin to match the angle of the head. To be honest, I don't know how correct that is. Basically flows right around here. And again, like if we're dealing with female head, then we're probably just going to keep these shapes nice and rounded. You know, because earlier someone was asking kind of like the difference between male and female heads. You know, if this was a male head, I probably would have designed this into more angular type shapes a little bit. But again, like, those are just like generic, super generic rules that are good for learning purposes, but not, like, you kind of learn that to recognize when certain things are happening, and then you deviate from it as needed, which is usually the case to some extent. You know, I mean, there's just so many different types of people out there. It's part of what makes drawing interesting, right? That's like the problem-solving aspect of drawing. Okay, so we're going to pick up some reflected light down in here, but it's going to be incredibly subtle. In fact, on the photo, I don't even know that there's any there. I might just add it in just because it's a good place for it. But we'll see. I don't know. We'll see what happens. I don't even know. It's been doing this for a long time and haven't gotten very far. I apologize. Hopefully we don't run out of time before I get to that point. So the hair, right? Part of the reason I picked this is because it has cool hair. And what do we do with the hair? Oh, also, what do we do with the neck? Right? Because I just drew this shape, but remember, we want to be in the habit of drawing complete shapes, right? That's kind of important. Important habit to develop is drawing complete shapes. Each one of these shadow shapes, notice, is a complete shape, right? This is a complete shape, goes all the way around. This is a complete shape. This is a complete shape. Each one of these shapes I put in make complete shapes. You know, this one down here, we didn't. We just have a line. Where does it end, right? Where's the rest of the shape? We got to figure that out right now. So her hair is actually wrapping this way a little bit. I think across here.
There are two more questions that I put on hold for a while.
Okay.
And it's been kind of a while, so I definitely want to get them in there.
Okay.
So the first one is from Celsius, who I think was at our last stream. So
Cool.
welcome back.
Welcome back, Celsius.
Celsius says, "Hi guys, I have troubles with measuring reference for my pencil drawn studies. The end result often ends up bigger than the base structure. Any tips? Thank you."
Yeah, measuring is difficult. More difficult than you would think, because it seems like such a simple thing. And what you're describing in terms of like the top half ending up too big, is that the issue I had? Maybe I ended up with the legs too long, I feel like a lot of the time. But where a lot of that comes from, or at least can come from, or at least in my experience where what was happening to me, is that there's a lot of like distortion that it can occur when you're measuring. And you have to be really, really careful to not get things too distorted. Sorry, there's a train going by.
Can we show the reference again for a second?
Yeah, you can put the
There are a few
reference back
people
on.
asking.
Yeah.
Okay, reference time.
So that's the reference. I'll answer the question in a second. Yeah, that's the reference photo. I don't know. I guess we'll try and figure out maybe how to get it on there the whole time next time, because I know it would be good to see. But it's tough because there's only so much room on the screen. I feel like the more stuff we put on the screen, the more you're not going to be able to see the drawing. It'd be good to know what people's thoughts are on that, maybe. Whether it's good to just switch more frequently to the reference, like switch back and forth more frequently so people can see it, or try and figure out how to get it actually on the screen.
Yeah.
Maybe they want that on there instead of me. I don't know. Maybe they're like, we just got this talking head on here when we want to see the reference.
Well, part of it is people on Instagram can't see it.
Yeah, that's a problem. If you're on Instagram and you're watching this and you're like, what the heck, I'm not seeing any reference. The reason is because that's on YouTube. We're streaming on YouTube at the same time. And
anyways, well, I didn't mean to interrupt Celsius's answer.
Oh, so Celsius, measuring, there's a lot of distortion that can occur. And this is what happened to me. I don't know for sure this is what's happening to you. But I used to measure, I still do. I do this, right? Like I hold my pencil like this and I use it to measure things. What I found out over time is what I would do is I would measure like this, right? I would use my finger to mark where one thing is, and then the pencil to mark where the next thing is. And then I'd use that to compare my thirds or whatever. And that is kind of how I would do it. But the problem I hit was like the proportions always ended up off. Like I would do these careful measurements and then I would be drawing and I'd be like, what the heck? The legs are way too long or the head's way too big or something would be off. And yet when I measure, I swear it's right. And what I finally realized was happening, and this happens even more if you draw in person and you're looking at a live model on a stage up in front of you and trying to measure like that way, it gets even more distortion. But what's happening is right now, right, the camera is looking straight down at the paper. And this, when I look over at the screen, I'm seeing, say that third line was here, I think is where I had it. Right? If I align that and align that, that looks exactly right. But when I look at my hand right now, right, because I'm looking at my hand like from where my head is instead of the camera, when I look this way, I'm looking at it from an angle, right? To me, it looks like right now I'm measuring like right about here, right? That's what it looks like from my angle. And the reason for that is because how tall my finger is, right? And when you look at it from an angle, it introduces like some distortion. And then what I notice is as I'm measuring, I measure farther down the board. And when I have my finger and hand way up here, I'm looking at my finger at a more extreme angle. And then when I have it down here, I'm looking like right down at it, basically. And at that point, there is no distortion. So like the measurement is kind of accurate down here, but then super distorted up here, and you end up with weird things happening. So what I kind of ended up doing was kind of just learning to compensate for that a little bit. When I started measuring, I would kind of frequently like lean forward and try to get actually above my pencil and directly above my finger and make sure everything's lined up properly and make sure I'm always looking straight down at the board when I measure stuff. And then after a while, after doing that, I kind of got a feel for like how much distortion there was. And now I went back to just measuring the way that I regularly do, but I can just kind of account for that distortion now, right? Like I know when I measure up here, I know that my finger is too high and that the measurement is really back here a little ways, right? And then I'll kind of like drop my pencil down past the point that I'm seeing a little bit. And over the time, eventually I just kind of got used to it, and now I can just measure quickly and it's accurate. But that was not something that happened automatically. I mean, it took a lot of conscious effort and a lot of, I don't know, analysis of trying to figure out what the heck was going on. Like, why weren't my measurements working? It was really strange. Especially because I would see instructors do it, and it seemed to work for them. And yet, I was doing the same thing they were doing, and it wasn't working. And it was very frustrating. And what's strange is that nobody seemed to realize that when I was a student. Like, nobody ever told me that. Nobody ever said, like, hey, watch out, the different ways you can distort things while you're measuring. Instead, it was just like, well, you gotta be really careful when you measure. And I think, like, the instructors and other students there, eventually you kind of intuitively figure out how to make measuring work. But that wasn't enough for me, apparently. I wanted to understand it on, like, an intellectual level, I guess. And so I dissected it, and that's what I came up with. But I don't know if for sure that's what's happening with you. But you just got to be really careful at the end of the day is kind of what it comes down to. Yeah.
There's another question. This
Okay.
is from way long ago, but
way long
better
ago.
late than never. This is from Jesse.
Okay, Jesse.
Jesse says, "This is awesome. Thanks, Brian and Olivia.
Cool. You're welcome. Yeah.
Can you say something about how drawing in training mode with the tools and techniques you're showing us translate to other mediums like painting?"
Yeah. So, essentially, this is a training technique, right? I mean, I think you know that because that was what you said. And what we're learning here, right, is about construction, first off, right? Like learning kind of like basic shapes, how to move them around, how to break them down to make a head or a body or whatever, different ways of doing that. And then shape, value, and edge, right, are the three beyond the construction, are the three main things, right? And so we have shape, which is the shapes of the shadows, shape of the halftone or midtone value shapes, the edges that those shapes have, whether they're soft edges, hard edges, firm, super soft, I don't know, whatever. It's an infinite variety of edge. Yeah, and then the value of those shapes, right? And learning to recognize, does something need to be darker? Does it need to be lighter? Is it too dark, too light? You know, what's going on? That stuff that you learn through doing this applies to everything. All mediums work that way. There's no difference. The thing with painting, if you want to get into painting, and partly why you want to learn this first before painting, is because painting gets even more complex, right? Because then you have all your construction stuff, your shape, your value, your edges, and then on top of that, they add color, temperature, and saturation, right? So then you have three more variables on top of that. And it complicates things a lot. And it's really tough for your brain to like kind of get wrapped around that in a way that makes sense. And if you spend your time studying this first, then essentially the shape, value, and edge aspects will be more intuitive, right? And you'll be able to construct a nice head, get the good shapes on there. You know what kind of edges you're going for. And then you can spend your time and your actual conscious thought energy thinking about things like color and temperature and saturation. But when you're first starting out, if you're trying to learn how to construct a head, learning about value and shape and edge and color, temperature, and saturation all at the same time, it's too much. Not that it can't be done. People learn that way, but it's hard. It's a ton of information for your brain to like kind of comprehend all at one time. And kind of like too much. This was too much for me. It was hard. And yeah, as far as other mediums, right? Then it's about like say you're like I want to do this, but I want to do it in gouache, right? Well, this same thing translates all shape, value, edge, all of that works the same. Then it's just a matter of figuring out how to make the marks that you need to make in the other medium, and kind of taking what you do and kind of like twisting it around to fit that other medium and saying like, okay, well, in gouache we need to work a little bit more with tiling, right? And there's different ways you can make soft edges. You can blend things, or you could tile things and work more with like gradients that way. I mean, there's just like a ton of different options. You know, inking, same thing. It seems very different from this, but the truth is the goals are the same, right? The soft edges need to be in the same place. Hard edges need to be in the same place. The shapes are going to be basically the same. The only difference is how do we create this effect with that other medium, right? And then, you know, same thing. Like your brain can do all that stuff kind of, I don't know, more intuitively. And that frees up the brain power to say like, well, now we're inking. So we need to use hatch marks, and we need to use various inking techniques to show where there's reflected light, to show where there's soft edges, right? Which is going to be done more linearly. And, you know, it'll take a little bit of time and experimentation to figure out how to do that in a different medium. But that process will go way, way faster if you've already spent time studying this type of stuff. Anyway, that's pretty much it. That's my answer. Hopefully that makes sense. Painting's hard. That's all I have to say about painting. Anyway, basically creating the shape in the hair here that's being hit by the light. You know, and I'm not copying the shape exactly. I'm doing like a simplified version of it that hopefully works and looks kind of interesting. And the rest of this, all this hair down in here is in shadow, right? We pick up like maybe a little bit of light here. So we get like this part kind of wrapping around this way. This I would say is mostly in shadow in here, maybe pops into the light a little bit here. And wraps back into shadow down this way. Right, so I have a little bit of light, hair in the light right here, shadow here, in the light here, shadow back up in here, down here, and then all out here. That's kind of the plan. And yeah, but you can see working with very, very soft edges and then a couple little strategic hard edges to kind of show what's going on in the hair. And hair is complicated. It's not the easiest, but once you kind of get the hang of the fact that really what we're rendering here is more the big form of the whole thing, you know, and just figuring out like what's the overall like three-dimensional shape of the hair, right? Like I drew it two-dimensionally, but I was kind of thinking more three-dimensionally when I did it. Like there's kind of like a front plane here, wraps around this way. It's almost like creating a helmet. Sounds weird, but it's basically like a hair-shaped helmet that we stick on the head and adjust our edges accordingly. Anyway, it's looking pretty good. Going on an hour and a half, I think. It might be time to stop soon. If I get started on the next stage, it's going to take a while.
There are a couple more comments and questions I can read to you real quick.
Okay.
So, the next one is from, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but Comic APN.
Yeah.
When it comes to painting, the only artist that comes to mind is Alex Ross. Do you know Alex Ross?
I do know of Alex Ross. I was about to say I used to be a big Alex Ross fan, but I still am. I still like Alex Ross. I've got some of his books back here somewhere. I don't know if you guys can see the shelves behind me, but there are Alex Ross books. Alex Ross is awesome. He works in gouache and like some airbrush stuff, and he's cool. He's probably one of the best gouache guys around. What were they asking about him?
That was just a comment.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Alex Ross is cool. I like Alex Ross.
And then Luis says, Brian, and the soft edge should be also a 4 in the value scale?
Yeah, so Luis, the soft edge, yeah, would be this one, right? So we want to create our entire shape. And to be honest, I don't know that these are quite dark enough. They probably will end up being a little bit darker, but our goal, if we want to work through this step by step, right? I mean, our goal ultimately is to learn this well enough that we can skip steps and combine steps and work a lot faster. But kind of like I was showing here, right? Like our goal is to create literally 2 values, right? So we'll kind of map it and then come in here and say like, okay, here's our shape, right? There's our shape. That could be this shape, right? That could be the lip. That could be this shadow shape up in here. But we want to fill it in a way where it literally becomes just one solid shape, but without core shadows, right? We don't want to put any core shadow in there yet. So you can see as I'm doing that, we're kind of getting like a weird edge right here. So I'm going to go in and kind of like adjust it again, soften this a little bit. You know, when you work through it and start filling this stuff in, you usually have to go back and adjust your edges a little bit. But we want something kind of like that, where there's no core shadow, right? And this is probably too light. Like this is probably not quite dark enough. And I don't know what it looks like on screen. Oh, pretty accurate. So, yeah. So we would map it first, right? Then fill it in. That gives us our 2 values. And then the problem is we need to add those core shadows back in. But this is all done at the 4 value, right? This whole thing is going to be this value. And then the next value up is going to be our core shadow value. And that is going to be this one, right? And that gets added back in strategically as needed. And don't overdo it, because it's easy to go in and put core shadows everywhere and it makes people look like they're shiny or something, or there's like a light shining at them from below or something like that. I want to avoid that. So we have to be really, really careful where we put them, and they're going to be subtle, and then we'll just go back and add them back in as needed. And we can say, okay, our core shadow is going to go here, right? And then our reflected light maybe is like this value, right? The way to think of it is this is our reflected light value, right? Which is going to be our lightest shadow value. Then you fill it all in, bring your 2 value stage all the way up to this, and then go back and adjust your edges, make sure everything's just right, and then kind of build back on top of it with that core shadow value used very sparingly. And that's pretty much it. And then you'd need a couple little areas also with this, like under the chin, right? To get this to read as reflected light right in here, we'd have to go a little darker under the chin, down on the neck as well. This would probably get a little darker and like fade out this way. And same thing with the nose, right? We'd have to have a darker value back up in here and probably in the nostril and stuff to get this to read as reflected light. But yeah, hopefully that makes sense. And yeah, I don't know. Tempted to start filling this in, but I think it's going to take too long. I feel like we're kind of out of time. So I might just leave it as this. Decent demo. This would be equivalent to one of my, well, if you were like in my head drawing class, this is kind of what you would see for like a week 2 demo probably. Maybe even week 1 for the head drawing, you know, because that one we want to really focus on getting things up to more of a finish. So usually the last 3 weeks I'll do more like a full value type demo. But this, I did this wrong. There we go. And then like if you're taking like the head fundamentals class, right? Like we would do this on week 2, I think. Like week 1 would purely be construction and talking about how to construct the head from different angles. Week 2 would be Mapping. How do I order that? I'm forgetting my own class. Week 2 would be, I guess, mapping for the head fundamentals class. Forgot how I run my own class.
That's a good
It's
question.
embarrassing.
That
Yeah.
you taught that a while back, huh? Like last year?
That was last term.
Really?
Yeah. I teach that one like a couple times a year.
That's fun.
Yeah. But basically, the head fundamentals class, what I'm getting at is that it works its way up week by week, all the way up to a full value drawing on the last week. You know, so like the last week is full value. The second to last week is maybe more like 2-value mapped type stuff. The third week is just facial features, right? Like I do one where we just go in and talk about facial features and how eyes and noses and lips and stuff work. And then week 2 is more, I guess, mapping. Maybe that's the value week. There's one week where we talk about mapping and stuff. That must be it. I don't know why I blanked on my own class, but it's organized so that it builds on itself for the fundamental one. And then when you take the regular head drawing class, it's more like, it starts with construction because we have such a wide range of students in our classes. You know, like every class has a mix of like kind of more advanced students and beginning level students. So even the head drawing class starts with more of like a fundamental type demo, you know, in the first couple weeks. And then what's cool is if you take a gold level class and you can get feedback, then that's where I can really tailor everything to you, what you need in your skill level specifically. You know, so if we have a beginning level person in the regular head drawing class, and they're like a gold level student and they're getting feedback on their work, then if they watch a more advanced demo, it's not that big of a deal, right? Because then when they turn their work in the critique, I can like, you know, we do like draw over critiques, and I can go in and tell them all the fundamental stuff that they need to know and get it working.
There's another question from Luis here.
Yeah.
He asks, first he says, thanks, Brian.
You're welcome, Luis.
Then he asks another question. When filling the shadow shapes with tonal value, how should you grab the pencil? And then he also just posted, also, I would like to know how the movement would be in that case when it comes to filling the shadow shapes.
So when we're talking about filling in shadow shapes and doing these big blocks of tone, what I would recommend is to try to keep it relatively simple. Right? Like we don't want to draw attention to the shadows, right? We want our focal point probably to be in the light, maybe an eye. Could be a nose if her head's tilted down and everything's like really in shadow or something in the eyes. But essentially, we want very simplified shadow marks, if any. I mean, if you can get it perfectly smooth, that would be good. If you want to introduce some strokes, like kind of marks, you know, showing your strokes in there, make sure they go top to bottom, right, in the shadows. And there's exceptions to that, of course. There's always exceptions to these rules. But generally speaking, I would do top to bottom type marks like this, right? Like I would come in here and go, and notice, okay, so you're asking about holding the pencil too, right? Essentially, there's different ways I can grip it. One, when I'm drawing, is just between these two fingers, and I can just draw and do different things with it. I can drag it, I can flip it up on the tip and use it on the tip and get really thin lines. Or I can kind of choke up on it a bit and put my finger right on the charcoal, pretty much, because we don't want it to break, but we need to put a lot of pressure sometimes. So I'll put my finger right where the charcoal hits the paper, right, like right there. And then from there, practice making these downward strokes and stacking them up. And it just takes practice. I went through a period as a student where I would see my instructors do this, and I would swear there was like some sort of trick to it, because they could do it so clean and so fast, and I couldn't do it hardly at all. And after years of doing this, I can say that their answer when I would ask them about that was exactly correct, which is it's practice and dexterity, and you know, you can fill out these big blocks of tone. Then notice the problem we have here, right, is we have a hard edge all the way across here, right? Hard edge across here, hard edge across the bottom. It basically has hard edges everywhere, which we don't really want when we're filling in shadows. So you could do it that way and then go in and kind of try to soften the edges, but that's always kind of tough to do, right? So what we can do instead is going to be more like the same thing. Hold the pencil the same way, get my finger on the charcoal while hitting the paper, but instead of just going top to bottom, I'm going to make like a circular motion, right? So like say the paper's here, I'm doing this, it's actually like a circular motion this way. And what that does is it creates softer marks, right? So you can see if you do that circular motion, and do it right, you get like a softer type of mark making. It's looking a little hard up there, but you can see how it's like softer all the way around. There we go. You know, compared to this. So that's kind of the two main ways that I fill things in, just depending on the situation. And this, as you can see, like this value I hit pretty fast on my first try. This one, a little lighter. You got to spend a little more time building it up, but then it blends into things really well because it has the softer edges, right? And that's what I was doing down here on these when I was filling them in. And I was saying, like, you need to fill them in a way where you don't end up with like things that look like core shadows everywhere. And I was doing that circular motion. And so I was blending the soft edge that I had mapped with the soft edge of the value that I was filling it in with. And it just kind of like blends together. Again, not easy to do. It takes a lot of practice to build the dexterity to do it. But it's worth taking the time to do. I mean, you got to build dexterity somehow. You know, regardless of what medium, even if you're using like, you're like, I don't want to use charcoal, I want to use graphite, I want to do something like this. Or maybe there's a lot of people that can't get these supplies. Like apparently smooth newsprint is really hard to get in certain parts of the world and certain parts of this country. There's a lot of people that just can't get it. And they're making less and less of it all the time. Last time I tried to buy some, like the brand that I usually buy was no longer existing. And there's, I think, only like 1 or 2 brands left that actually make smooth newsprint. So it's hard to get now, apparently. But it's still out there. This, I think, is Seth Cole smooth newsprint. It's pretty good. The Pro Art used to be really good, but that's the stuff I can't find anymore. And there's the Strathmore makes a smooth newsprint also, but it's the worst option of the 3. But still usable. So if that's all you can get, it's okay. I used to use it all the time. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So hopefully that answers your question, Louise. Our question reader walked away and left. I don't know if you wrote anything. Let's see. Need to know how the movement would be to fill the shadow shapes. Oh yeah, okay. Was there another question that popped up or no?
Oh, my dad just said hi.
Oh, hello. To Olivia's dad.
Hi, Dad.
I was going to say his name, but I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't tell everybody in the world.
It's a secret.
Yeah.
Well, his username's here. So.
Oh, okay.
That's just his Italian name.
Okay. Yeah. Nice. Anyway, he joined just in time to see us stop because we're out of time.
Yeah.
Yep.
My mom's been watching the whole time.
Oh, well, that's cool.
Yeah.
Good. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. And we'll see you next week, I guess.
Yeah, next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday, yeah. That's pretty much it. If you want to take a class, you can check out our website, foundationartschool.com. And I think the new schedule's up.
New schedule's up?
New schedule's up. Registration opens, I think, this Sunday.
The 20th, yep.
Is that right? This Sunday, because it's the end of week 5, and then next term starts 3 weeks after that, I guess. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the subscription service.
And then we have a subscription library as well, right? So basically, when we film all these demos for the classes, you know, we teach the class, like a 5-week class, and then all those demos and critique videos that we film get added to our library of like past demos that you can subscribe to. And you can subscribe to that thing and watch like a certain number of demos each month, depending on what level you subscribe at. And you don't get feedback necessarily because it's not like a class. It's just kind of like our library of past demos. But then we started a Discord server as well for people that, you know, you can go in there and there's a whole bunch of other students in there that post stuff constantly. So you can put it in there. And then I try to answer as many questions as I can in there. Like every few days I try to go in there and answer questions or comment on stuff or whatever. So, you know, if you're just doing the subscription library, you're always welcome to ask me questions in the Discord, for sure. You know, so yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. I will see you next time. Goodbye. Push stop.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hang on, everyone. Elevator music. Cue. Alright, bye, y'all.